The thing about accidentally starting an interstellar revolution is that it usually begins with something stupid. In my case, it started with mittens, safety mittens, to be specific. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Jake Thompson, and I'm a janitor on Diplomatic Station Alpha 7, or as we humans call it, the filing cabinet. It's not the most glamorous job in the galaxy, but someone has to keep the floors clean for all those important alien diplomats who spend their days writing new regulations about how dangerous we humans are. You see, in the grand cosmic lottery of evolution, humans drew what the Galactic Concordat calls a death world card. Earth, with its horrible gravity, toxic oxygen atmosphere, and terrifying temperature ranges, apparently makes us the equivalent of space hawks. The fact that we can digest capsaicin for fun and survive heights that would give most species an existential crisis doesn't help our case. Most days I just go about my business, cleaning up after various diplomatic functions and trying not to startle the more delicate species when I have to lift dangerously heavy objects like chairs or data pads. The Concordat's patronizing attitude was annoying, sure, but manageable. They treated us like we were some kind of exotic, dangerous pets who had somehow learned to use tools and speak. Oh, look at the clever Deathworlder, operating complex machinery. How adorable, they'd say, while simultaneously installing warning signs around any human-operated equipment. But then came the day High Commissioner Fluff Snacks, yes, that's their actual name, decided that humans needed to wear safety mittens at all times while on diplomatic stations. Not just any mittens, mind you, but specially designed impact-dampening digit enclosures to prevent us from accidentally crushing delicate equipment or, heaven forbid, shaking hands too firmly with a diplomat. I was mopping the main conference room floor when the announcement came over the station's comm system. The High Commissioner's voice warbled through the speakers with all the authority of a nervous substitute teacher trying to control a classroom. Attention all station personnel. In accordance with Regulation 47B, subsection 12, paragraph 9, all Class D species, that's humans, for those who haven't memorized the classification system, must now wear approved safety mittens while on diplomatic premises. This is for everyone's protection and comfort. Compliance is mandatory within 24 standard hours. I stopped mopping and stared at my perfectly normal, non-threatening hands. The same hands that had been cleaning this station for 3 years without incident. The same hands that just yesterday had received a commendation for exceptional care in handling delicate crystalline waste materials. Which is fancy diplomatic speak for good job not breaking the expensive glasses at the reception. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered, watching as a pair of Xerxian diplomats scuttled past, their eye stalks swiveling to make sure they maintained a safe distance from the dangerous human with the mop. That's when I noticed something interesting. The cleaning solution I was using, approved by 17 different safety committees, was starting to eat through the floor sealant. Apparently, someone had forgotten to account for the interaction between the new extra safe cleaning compound and the recently installed ultra-protective floor coating. I looked at my soon-to-be mittened hands, then at the spreading chemical reaction, and finally at the stack of safety regulation manuals piled high on every desk in the conference room. And that's when I had an idea. A terrible, wonderful, absolutely maliciously compliant idea. Sometimes the best way to deal with absurd rules is to follow them so perfectly that the whole system chokes on its own bureaucracy. And if there's one thing humans are good at besides surviving on death worlds and terrifying the more delicate species with our ability to drink hot beverages, it's malicious compliance. I picked up my comm unit and called Dr. Maria Mad Dog Rodriguez, our station's human medical officer. If we were going to start a revolution, we might as well do it by the book. Every single book, in fact. All 17,000 volumes of Concordat safety regulations. The mittens, as it turned out, were just the beginning. The thing about bureaucrats is that they multiply faster than rabbits on a spring morning. Within hours of the mitten mandate, the Concordat had established the Committee for Deathworlder Safety, or CDS for those who enjoy acronyms almost as much as they enjoy making humans' lives difficult. High Commissioner Fluff Snacks, whose species evolved from something that looked suspiciously like a tribble with anxiety issues, appointed themselves as head of the committee. Their first official act was to requisition a larger office, because apparently you can't properly regulate dangerous species from a standard-sized workspace. The mittens are just Phase 1, Fluff Snacks announced during the committee's first emergency session, their fur rippling with what they probably thought was authoritative gravitas, but actually looked more like static cling. We need comprehensive safety measures to protect our more sensitive colleagues from inadvertent human-related incidents. I know all this because I was there, cleaning the air vents. Nobody ever looks up at the maintenance worker in the ceiling, especially if they're a simple Deathworlder who's clearly just there to handle the dangerous task of dust removal. The committee, made up of representatives from the galaxy's most cautious species, spent the next 4 hours listing every remotely dangerous thing they'd ever seen a human do. The list included such horrifying acts as walking too quickly, laughing at unexpected volumes, and my personal favorite, maintaining unnervingly steady eye contact. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been officially summoned to provide medical insight, sat through the entire session with the kind of peaceful smile that usually precedes someone's complete psychological breakdown. When a gelatin-based intelligence suggested that humans might need to be wrapped in bubble wrap while traversing corridors, she simply nodded and took extremely detailed notes. Perhaps, she said in her sweetest voice, we should also consider the safety implications of human respiratory force. I mean, we can blow out candles. Imagine the potential for accidental harm. The committee gasped in collective horror. 3 members had to be revived with smelling salts, which honestly just proved her point about respiratory sensitivity. By the end of the week, we had a new set of regulations that made the mitten mandate look reasonable. All humans must wear impact-absorbing boots that make us sound like squeaky toys when we walk. We have to announce our presence by ringing a little bell before entering any room, like some kind of Deathworld lepers. Our food must be consumed in specially designated areas because apparently watching a human eat a sandwich is too traumatic for some species. And my absolute favorite, we are no longer allowed to use cleaning supplies without supervision from a qualified safety observation officer. That last one was particularly rich considering I was the only one on the station qualified to handle the industrial strength cleaners needed to deal with some of our more exotic diplomatic messes. But rules were rules. I found Dr. Rodriguez in her office, methodically highlighting every single regulation in the new safety manual. The manual was 847 pages long. She was using 17 different colors of highlighter, and there appeared to be some kind of system involved. Please tell me you have a plan, I said, jingling as I walked because of the mandatory bells now attached to my work uniform. She looked up, and I saw that special kind of crazy in her eyes that you only get after reading too many safety regulations in one sitting. Oh, Jake, she said, holding up a particularly neon-highlighted page, I have so many plans. Did you know that according to Section 47C, all human-operated equipment must be certified by no less than 3 separate safety inspectors? And did you know that there are only 2 qualified safety inspectors currently stationed in this entire sector of space? I started to smile. Then I remembered we weren't allowed to show teeth anymore because it counted as aggressive facial gesturing, so I quickly adopted the officially approved neutral Deathworlder expression. You're thinking what I'm thinking, I asked. That it's time to be the most safety-conscious humans in the history of the galaxy. She held up another manual, this one even thicker than the first. I've already filed 27 requests for equipment certification, in triplicate, each requiring a personal inspection. The nearest qualified inspector is 4 months of travel away. That's when I realized why she'd earned the nickname Mad Dog. It wasn't because she was dangerous. It was because she had the patience and attention to detail to drive an entire bureaucracy mad. The Committee for Deathworlder Safety had no idea what they'd just started, but they were about to find out exactly how dangerous a human armed with paperwork could be. And I still hadn't even gotten to the coffee ban. Looking back, they really should have left the coffee alone. Humans can tolerate a lot. We'll put up with ridiculous regulations, survive in environments that would kill most species, and even wear stupid mittens if we absolutely have to. But messing with our caffeine supply, that's just asking for trouble. The memo came down on a Monday, because of course it did. Some bright spark in the Committee for Deathworlder Safety had finally noticed that humans regularly consumed a highly addictive psychoactive stimulant that could, in their words, enhance their already terrifying physical capabilities. Effective immediately, the memo read, the substance known as coffee and all related beverages containing caffeine are hereby classified as restricted combat stimulants, forbidden on all diplomatic stations and facilities. The sound of 17 human staff members collectively losing their minds echoed through the station's corridors. Even the Xerxians, who communicate primarily through subsonic vibrations, told us later they felt a disturbance in the force, or whatever they call their weird tentacle-based perception. Dr. Rodriguez called an emergency meeting of the human staff in the designated Deathworlder dining area, which was really just a repurposed storage closet with warning signs plastered all over the door. We all had to ring our mandatory safety bells before entering, creating what sounded like the world's most annoying wind chime concert. "They've gone too far," announced Rodriguez, her eye twitching slightly as she held up her contraband emergency coffee stash. "This isn't just about safety anymore. This is about control." "Can they even do this?" asked Terry from maintenance, who hadn't had his morning coffee and was therefore speaking in the special kind of whisper that suggests someone is trying very hard not to commit interstellar diplomatic incidents. "Oh, they can try," Rodriguez replied, and there was that look again. The one that meant she was about to weaponize bureaucracy in ways that would make even the most hardened paper pusher cry. But here's the thing about the coffee ban. They filed it under Regulation 89D, restricted combat enhancers. And I asked, already starting to grin despite the regulation against showing teeth. And according to Regulation 89D, subsection 7, any substance classified as a combat enhancer requires a full xenobiological impact study before restriction. Which means they need to prove it's actually dangerous, finished Lisa from communications, who was hugging her world's most dangerous secretary mug like it contained the last coffee in the universe. Which, on this station, it probably did. Exactly, Rodriguez said. And to do that, they need to document every single potential impact. On every single species. Under every single possible condition. We all sat there for a moment, contemplating the beautiful disaster that was about to unfold. The Concordat had over 300 member species, each with their own unique biochemistry. The testing requirements alone would take years. But that's not even the best part, Rodriguez continued, now practically vibrating with the kind of energy that comes from either too much coffee or too much righteous bureaucratic vindication. Because they classified it as a combat enhancer, they also have to prove we've been using it as one. Which means they have to document every single cup of coffee ever consumed on this station and prove it was used to enhance combat capabilities. I finished, finally understanding why she'd earned that Mad Dog nickname. This wasn't malicious compliance anymore. This was bureaucratic warfare. The next day, we submitted 42,847 individual incident reports, one for every cup of coffee consumed on the station in the past year. Each report required a full analysis of the consumer's activities following consumption. Most of these activities involved exciting combat maneuvers, such as filed reports with slightly increased efficiency and stayed awake during budget meetings. We also submitted formal requests for clarification on exactly what constituted coffee-like substances. Did tea count? Hot chocolate? What about those energy drinks that Terry somehow kept smuggling in despite them being more heavily regulated than actual spacecraft fuel? The committee's filing system crashed 3 times trying to process all the paperwork. High Commissioner Fluffsnax's fur turned an interesting shade of green when they realized they would personally have to review each and every report. But the real genius of Rodriguez's plan wasn't just the paperwork. It was what happened next. We complied. Completely and totally. Not a single human on the station touched a drop of caffeine. Instead, we moved at exactly half our normal speed, cited reduced cognitive function as the reason for every missed deadline, and took the maximum allowed number of safety breaks due to stimulant withdrawal symptoms. The station's productivity dropped by 60% in the first week alone. It turns out humans on coffee had been doing a lot more than anyone had realized. Who knew that having your maintenance staff operate at half speed while following every single safety protocol to the letter could cause such chaos? And that's when the coffee smuggling rings started. But that's another story entirely, and one that technically I'm not allowed to discuss without filing Form 27B/6. Let's just say that by the end of the month, even the Xerxians were filing complaints about the slowdown. And when a species that measures time in geological epochs tells you things are moving too slowly, you know you've got problems. The coffee ban was just the beginning of the end for the Concordat. They just didn't know it yet. Here's the thing about humans that the Concordat never quite understood: we don't just adapt to rules, we master them. And when those rules are ridiculous, we turn that mastery into an art form. Operation Workplace Safety Compliance began on a Tuesday. We chose Tuesday because, according to Regulation 456T, all new safety protocols must be implemented at the start of a standard work cycle, and we couldn't start on Monday because that would have violated the mandatory 48-hour notification period required by subsection 12. I watched from my newly designated safe cleaning distance as doctor. Rodriguez briefed the human staff in our regulation-compliant safety postures, all of us wearing our full safety gear, which by now included mittens, squeaky boots, bells, reflective vests, and mandatory foam padding on all external joints. Remember, she said, consulting her 17-point safety checklist, every action must be preceded by a safety assessment, followed by a safety confirmation, and documented with appropriate signage. Every action, Terry asked, his voice muffled by his regulation-mandated low-volume speech dampener. Every single one. And so it began. The Great Slowdown, as it would later be known in Concordat historical records, or that time humans weaponized safety regulations as we prefer to call it. Did you know that according to Concordat safety regulations, any object heavier than 2.3 standard units requires a 3-person lift team, safety spotter, and pre-lift planning session? We did. Oh boy, did we know. I personally spent 4 hours moving a single trash bin. The planning session took 2 hours, the safety equipment check another hour, and the actual moving took about 30 seconds. But then we had to do the post-movement safety assessment and file the completion report. In triplicate. The real masterpiece, though, was Lisa's handling of interspecies communications. According to Section 892P of the Communications Safety Protocols, all verbal interactions between humans and non-humans had to be pre-screened for potentially startling content. So she created a flowchart. A beautiful, complex, maliciously compliant flowchart. I want to say good morning to your Xerxian co-worker. That's going to require a notice of intent to greet, filed at least 6 hours in advance, with full documentation of your planned volume level, smile intensity measured in standard units of tooth exposure, and a detailed risk assessment of potential startling outcomes. But the crown jewel of our compliance campaign was what became known as the incident of the load-bearing post-it note. It started when I discovered a small but fascinating contradiction between Regulation 47B workplace signage and Regulation 123C document preservation. You see, according to 47B, all safety notices had to be prominently displayed, but 123C stated that no document could be removed without proper archival procedures. So when I placed a safety notice reading "Warning, this notice is load-bearing" on a stack of committee reports, it created what we in the business call a bureaucratic paradox. The notice couldn't be removed because it was a safety warning, but the reports couldn't be accessed because removing the notice would violate document preservation protocols. The entire records department ground to a halt while the committee debated the proper procedure for resolving this contradiction. They're still debating it, by the way. Last I heard, they'd formed 3 subcommittees just to define what load-bearing means in the context of adhesive paper products. Dr. Rodriguez, meanwhile, had turned the medical bay into a fortress of compliance. Every Band-Aid required a 40-page risk assessment. Every headache pill needed 3 signatures and a witness. She even started requiring safety helmets for people filling out safety forms about safety helmets. But that's not in the regulations, protested one particularly frustrated committee member. Oh, but it is, she replied, pulling out a copy of Regulation 789X. All activities involving potential cognitive strain must be conducted with appropriate protective equipment. She then proceeded to file a concern report about the committee members' failure to wear proper safety gear while reviewing safety protocols. The beauty of it all was that nobody could actually complain because we were following every single rule exactly as written. We had taken malicious compliance and turned it into a performance art. High Commissioner Fluff Snacks's fur was now in a constant state of distress puff, making them look less like a dignified bureaucrat and more like a dandelion in a hurricane. They kept trying to find ways to make us work faster, only to be reminded that suggesting shortcuts would violate at least 16 different safety protocols. And then came the day when Terry, beautiful, wonderful Terry, discovered the regulation about emotional safety distances. But that's a story that deserves its own incident report. Form 27B/6, obviously. In triplicate. They say the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Turns out that applies to bureaucracies too, especially when they're crushed under the weight of their own paperwork. The Concordat's breaking point came exactly 3 weeks, 4 days and 6 hours after Operation Workplace Safety Compliance began. I know the exact time because I had to log it in my Incident Observation Journal, as required by Regulation 345Q, subsection 9, paragraph 12, subparagraph T. It started when High Commissioner Fluff Zacks received an urgent message from the Central Concordat Authority. Apparently someone had noticed that station productivity had dropped to approximately the same speed as continental drift. More importantly, the backup of safety compliance paperwork had grown so large that it was actually affecting local gravity. I was cleaning the council chamber at the time, following all 127 steps of the safe and effective surface sanitization protocol, when Fluff Snacks burst in, their fur so puffed up they looked like they'd just lost a fight with a balloon factory. "This is impossible," they squeaked, waving a stack of papers that I recognized as Dr. Rodriguez's latest batch of potential safety concerns regarding the Safety Concerns Filing System reports. "Do you know how many forms she submitted today alone?" 4,327, I answered promptly, because according to Regulation 567M, all humans must maintain awareness of daily documentation volumes within their work zone, not counting appendices. The Commissioner's eye stalks twitched. "And do you know how many of those forms require my personal review and signature?" "All of them," I replied cheerfully, while carefully documenting my current cleaning stroke angle as required by the new enhanced mopping safety guidelines, plus the verification forms confirming you've reviewed them, and of course the forms acknowledging receipt of the verification forms. That's when something beautiful happened. Fluff Snacks, in their agitated state, knocked over a cup of water. Under normal circumstances, I would have simply cleaned it up. But these weren't normal circumstances. I pulled out my emergency spill response manual, all 942 pages of it. "This is now an active liquid hazard zone," I announced, reaching for my regulation-mandated emergency response bell. "According to safety protocols, I'll need to evacuate everyone within a 10-meter radius while I submit the initial hazard assessment paperwork." "It's just water," Fluff Snacks protested. "Unconfirmed, potentially hazardous liquid," I corrected, already filling out Form 89C Preliminary Unexpected Liquid Event Report. "We'll need a full chemical analysis before we can classify it. I'll just submit a request to the Safety Assessment Committee. Their next available meeting is in 3 weeks. But this is the main council chamber. We have an emergency session in an hour." "Don't worry," I said, reaching for another form. "There's an expedited process for emergency venue reassignment. We'll just need signatures from all affected parties, in quintuplicate, with notarized translations in all official Concordat languages. I think the nearest certified notary is only 6 light years away." That's when Fluff Sacks did something unprecedented. They tried to grab the mop. The sound of 17 different safety alarms going off was almost musical. Unauthorized personnel attempting to access maintenance equipment. That's Forms 112B through 112F, plus an emergency session of the Equipment Access Review Board. Within minutes, Dr. Rodriguez arrived, wearing her full safety inspector regalia, which by now included a light-up helmet with "Safety First" in 7 different languages. "I'm afraid I'll have to cite you for attempted unauthorized equipment operation," she said, pulling out a citation pad that was thicker than most spacecraft manuals. "Unless you've completed the Basic Maintenance Equipment Safety Certification course. It's only 12 weeks long, with a 6-month waiting period for the practical exam." Fluff Snacks deflated like a punctured balloon. How? How are you doing this?" "Doing what Rodriguez asked innocently, while simultaneously filing a report about potential emotional distress in the workplace. We're simply following all applicable safety regulations. Would you like me to quote the relevant sections? I've prepared a comprehensive presentation. It's only 8 hours long, and according to Regulation 789P, attendance is mandatory for all senior staff members." The Commissioner's fur, which had been cycling through various states of distress, suddenly went completely flat. "You've memorized all the regulations?" "Oh, not just memorized," I chimed in, still carefully documenting the expanding water puddle's circumference in accordance with Liquid Event Monitoring Protocol 7. "We've cross-referenced them. Would you like to see our spreadsheet? It's quite impressive, though viewing it requires Level 3 data safety clearance and a signed waiver acknowledging potential cognitive strain." That's when Fluff's Axe did something even more unprecedented. They started laughing. Not the polite, diplomatic chuckle we usually heard in council sessions, but a full-blown, fur-shaking laugh of someone who's finally gotten the joke. You're not just following the rules, they said, wiping their eye stalks. You're using them to show us how absurd they are. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Rodriguez replied, while simultaneously submitting a request for a spontaneous emotional display safety assessment. We're simply being thorough. Would you like to see the thoroughness documentation checklist? The commissioner held up a hand. No, no more forms, no more checklists, no more regulations about regulations. They looked around the chamber, at the stacks of safety manuals reaching nearly to the ceiling, at the warning signs covering almost every surface, at the growing puddle of water that would take 17 different forms just to clean up. You've made your point. And that's how I, a simple station janitor, ended up being appointed as the Concordat's first director of regulatory reasonableness review, though honestly, I think they just wanted someone who knew where all the forms were buried. But the best part, they let us have our coffee back, though I still had to fill out a form to celebrate that victory. Looking back on it all now, from my new office with its clear view of the station's diplomatic quarter, I can't help but appreciate the irony. The Concordat had spent centuries trying to make the galaxy safer through increasingly complex regulations, only to be defeated by the simple art of following those regulations perfectly. The day after High Commissioner Fluff Snacks's breakdown in the council chamber, the Concordat's central authorities sent an emergency delegation to the station. They arrived to find every human staff member sitting perfectly still at their desks, wearing full safety gear, filling out forms about the safety implications of filling out forms. The delegation's leader, a tall, spindly being named Ambassador K. Rax, took one look at the mountain of safety documentation waiting for their review and did something unprecedented in Concordat history. They suggested we skip the paperwork. You could have heard a safety pin drop. But Ambassador Dr. Rodriguez said, already reaching for her citation pad, that would violate at least 73 different regulations about proper documentation procedures. Then perhaps K. Rax said carefully, it's time we reviewed those regulations. And that's how the Great Reform began. They called it the Common Sense Initiative, though I prefer its unofficial title, Operation Stop Being Ridiculous About Everything. My first act as Director of Regulatory Reasonableness Review was to implement what I called the Can You Explain This with a Straight Face test. If you couldn't explain a regulation without laughing or crying, it probably needed revision. The safety mittens were the first to go, followed quickly by the bells, the squeaky boots, and the requirement for humans to announce their presence with warning signs in 17 different languages. Dr. Rodriguez was appointed head of the new Practical Safety Standards Committee, though she still occasionally submits unnecessarily complex paperwork just to keep everyone on their toes. Last week, she filed a 10-page report on the potential safety implications of excessive paperwork, complete with citations and cross-references. I'm pretty sure she did it just for fun. Terry from maintenance finally got to remove all those warning signs, though he kept one that read, "Caution, this sign has become sentient due to excessive regulation," just because it made him laugh. And Lisa from communications? She now runs training sessions on how to say good morning without filing a permission slip. They're surprisingly popular, especially among the Xerxians, who turned out to have a wonderful sense of humor once they weren't terrified of being startled by unexpected human greetings. As for High Commissioner Fluff Snacks, they took early retirement and wrote a best-selling memoir titled How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Deathworlders. Last I heard, they were running a consulting firm specializing in bureaucratic dysfunction recovery. The coffee ban was officially lifted in a ceremony that involved exactly 0 forms and only one simple sign that read, "Drink responsibly, don't spill on the Xerxians." We celebrated with a station-wide party that required only a single page of safety guidelines, most of which were actually sensible. These days, the station runs smoother than ever. Turns out when you treat people like competent adults instead of accidents waiting to happen, they actually live up to those expectations. Who knew? We still have safety regulations, of course. Some of them are even important. But now they fit in a single manual instead of requiring their own storage deck. And if anyone starts getting too enthusiastic about adding new rules, I just pull out the old load-bearing post-it note incident report. Works every time. The funny thing is, in all the years of trying to make the galaxy safer through endless regulations, The Concordat never realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is make things too safe. Sometimes you need a little chaos, a little common sense, and maybe a janitor who knows exactly how to clean up a bureaucratic mess. Oh, and for the record, I still keep all my incident reports, just in case. Old habits die hard, and you never know when you might need to accidentally start another revolution. Though next time I'm skipping the mittens.